going to be talking about our project today, which is called Gendering ELT, International Perspectives, Practices and Policies. And you see our lovely logo in here. We've been working on this project for over a year now, and we'll be reporting on some of the findings of this project. This is a project that takes place in 10 different countries and involves a large team of researchers who have been working on this. So Ashley and I are here today talking about this, but this has been the joint effort of lots of colleagues. So on your screen just now, you can see the UK-based team. So we've got Ashley, myself, Gusha Kutuk as our research assistant, and Professor Anna Robinson-Pent, who is our senior advisor. We've been joined by colleagues in 10 different countries around the world. So we have Brazil, in order, as you see, from top, bottom, left, right, Brazil, Botswana, Indonesia, Morocco, Bangladesh, China, Colombia, Philippines, Ukraine, and Vietnam. And you can also see the lovely faces of our co-investigators and researchers involved in this project. So in Brazil, we've got Dr. Daniele Menezes, in Botswana, Dr. Sibonile Ellis, in Indonesia, Dr. Uji Samahuji, then in Morocco, Professor Fatima Sadike, in Bangladesh, Mrs. Guna Harbagun, in China, Mrs. Christina Yen. In Colombia, we've got Dr. Teresita Sevilla. In the Philippines, Dr. Jenny Lontong. In Ukraine, Professor Anna Chesnokova. And finally, in Vietnam, Dr. Hang Nguyen. So the project has really two main parts. We are here looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But we're doing that in a very specific context, which will be familiar to all of us in this session: English language teaching, English language education. Our point of departure is really the classroom. So we were interested in investigating the perspectives of the key stakeholders in the language classroom. And here I'm referring to school students, school teachers, and school leaders. But I mean, as I'm very much sure you all know, what happens in the classroom is not only a result of these three stakeholders. Parents do play also an important role in shaping and influencing and informing what happens or perhaps doesn't happen in the English language classroom. So we were also very keen to involve and learn from them in this project. Looking towards the future, we also investigated the perspectives of lecturers and student teachers. So seeing what is done nowadays in teacher education programs and seeing how future teachers perceive the integration of gender topics, more specifically gender equality, into their practice. Now, how did we do that? We were interested in three main parts. We were interested in these 6 stakeholders' perspectives. So we administered online questionnaires and we conducted online interviews. Mind you, all the research projects, or well, most of the research project and definitely all of the data collection was done during COVID, during lockdown, during restrictions, so on and so forth. So we need to bear that in mind when we're talking about this project. We also were interested in getting to know about practices, but because it was done during COVID, we couldn't go into the classroom. It wouldn't be safe for the researchers or for the participants. So we worked with proxies in relation to how we could study their practices. So for teachers, what we did is we asked them to design lessons to bring gender matters into the English language classroom. And for student teachers, we asked them to write reflective essays on whether their practice should contribute to gender equality. We know that these are not practices. We know that's very different from going in and observing a class. So as I said, this is a proxy to investigating their practices, either current teachers' practices or future teachers' practices. We are also very keen to look at the macro context. So we worked with a number of countries, more specifically 3 countries, which were our case study countries, to investigate the policies. What do these policies, what do the national and local policies say about the integration, the embedding of gender equality in English language teaching? Now, we've got an hour in here. We couldn't possibly be talking about everything, so we're going to be focusing on the perspectives that have been collected through questionnaires and interviews, and we will also be talking about the practices, looking at lessons. And I think this ties in really well with the previous session, if you were here, in which Elizabeth was saying about the need for developing materials, and that's what we're going to be reporting in here, providing examples of what we can do in our classes to bring gender into the classroom. So I will hand you over now to Ashley.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes, just a little bit of background, and I think it's very important when we situate our current project in relation to past research. And as it says here, research on gender matters in ELT. It really, really does matter in ELT. Why? Because ELT can be a tool that it can be used to foster social transformation and promote equality. We have good evidence that this can happen through in primary contexts, secondary contexts, and then in university contexts as well. But research also shows us that this is obviously not without its challenge. Raising teachers' and learners' awareness of gender-related topics can and do face resistance, and that can emerge from context for example, gender equality would result in a significant shift in status quo and challenge the dominance of high status groups. So we know there are problems. We also know from research that teachers may be uncertain about what kind of support that they have in relation to curricula, in relation to their own institutions, and indeed to their own local communities. We also know from past research that teachers do see a strong need for textbook changes. And I think that relates to the first presentation today, where there was a wonderful analysis, textbook analysis done, and lots of recommendations, good recommendations for change. And we would most firmly stand behind that as well. So there is a need for textbook changes to encourage gender equality, but also, as we know from our project, does require some policy initiatives and government directives.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ashley. So in order to respond to the gaps that we've got in the literature, our project had several aims. So we were interested in investigating participants' understandings of gender and gender equality. We were also very much keen on getting to know how they perceived the links between gender equality and English language teaching. We wanted to investigate the representation or the misrepresentation of gender in policies, curricula, and materials. We wanted to see the role that teacher education programs played or didn't play in enabling teachers and enabling future English language teachers to engage in transformative gender practices. We wanted to see how these student teachers conceptualize gender equality in their future practice, if they see that there is a scope for doing that, or if they don't perceive that as part of their remit. And also, we were very much interested in investigating how teachers embed gender matters, gender topics in their locally designed ELT lessons. So for this presentation, we're going to be focusing primarily on the 2 points that you see on your screen just now. So we're going to be reporting on the links that participants see between gender equality and English language teaching, and on how we can address the potential issues, the potential barriers, the potential challenges that teachers face, or that educational stakeholders face in bringing gender matters to the English language classroom. I think the key message in here that we want to reinforce time and time again is that we want to bring out teachers' voices. We want to foreground teachers' voices. We want to empower teachers, and we want to report on the excellent practice that teachers have been engaged in across the world, not only in the 10 different countries, but even further than that. So in terms of the data that we're going to be drawing on for this presentation, we're drawing on 3 different data sets. So we're drawing on the results of our online questionnaires, and you can see that overall we had over 1,100 respondents, and these numbers varied across countries, and that is understandable because remember that all the data was collected online during COVID, and access to technology was one of the barriers we know across countries. We're also drawing on the interview data sets that we've got. So here you see that we interviewed 2 participants per stakeholder group. So we had 6 stakeholder groups: school students who were in their 13 or 14 years old, their parents, school teachers, school leaders, and at the university level, we interviewed both university students, those who were taking English language teacher education courses, and their lecturers. Now, this is per country. So you see that we've got 12 participants per country. We've got 10 countries altogether. So this means that 120 interviews were conducted across the project. The final data set that we are drawing on is the lessons that the participants have submitted to us, that teachers around the 10 different countries the project took place submitted to us. And I can see that in the chat, some of our participants are here, so that's great to see them here joining us for this presentation. Thank you very much for engaging with the project, for being so generous in sharing your lesson plans with us. So these are the 3 data sets that we're going to be drawing on for this presentation, and Aisling will be talking a bit more about the methods of analysis now.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you very much, Vander. Just to outline, this isn't a very data-heavy presentation, but we do want to give you an indication of the evidence that we have collected to convince you of the points that we make later on, I suppose. So just in relation to a little bit of information about the online questionnaire, respondents were presented with items, and they were asked to indicate their agreement or disagreement on a scale ranging from 1 to 5. Scores above 3 indicate agreement, while scores below 3 indicate disagreement with a particular item. In relation to, in relation to the interviews, the interview data, excuse me, was transcribed, translated, reviewed, and analysed using content analysis, and the anonymised extracts from these interviews are presented here in this here to exemplify just some of the understandings and experiences from participants in either their own words or in translations thereof. Just as Vander mentioned, we are drawing on the data set, and there are a number of data sets for this project. So just to let you, and one of the others that we're drawing is the lesson plans. The analysis of the lesson plans doesn't, for example, feature in our presentation today. Rather, we're going to connect the interview analysis from the teachers with the data set of lesson plans, really just to show what can be done in response to the interviews that we have, and that these lesson plans and activities, as Vander has mentioned, and as colleagues here, I can't see the chat, but yes, very good, are here, who the teachers and those from around the world who have contributed to this project, and that's really, really, really important. Okay. All right, just as I said, just for the focus for this particular presentation, we're going to look at 3 broad questions. So from our results, from our the administration of online questionnaires around the 10 countries. What do teachers think about the topic of gender equality? Should it be included in ELT? Do teachers know how to include gender equality topics in their practices? And are materials available to teach about gender equality in language classrooms? Okay, so we take those just one by one. And the first one, do teachers think the topic of gender equality should be included? The answer, if we had a poll, and I know we're not doing a poll, we could have, I guess, but hurrah, the answer is yes. When we surveyed teachers, yes, they were more likely to agree that it should be included. What was really interesting for us was that whenever we looked at the analysis of the questionnaires, we did find some significant differences across genders and across countries. So for example, there, as you can see, there was a higher tendency among male teachers to agree that gender equality is a topic that should be included. Both male and female teachers agreed, obviously, but there was a higher tendency for male teachers, those who participated in the study, to agree that gender equality is a topic. We also found, for example, that significant differences across countries. So, for example, I don't know if you know your flags here, but in Ukraine, teachers showed less agreement with this than teachers in Vietnam, Botswana, Brazil, Colombia, and who have I missed? Philippines as well. Okay. All right. Moving on, what should we interpret from that? Well, I think the news is really good and it's really positive. With both male and female teachers supporting the inclusion of gender equality topics, this is really indicative that gender inequalities are understood by teachers as a real problem. Okay, so not just a female problem, a woman problem, it's understood by teachers as everyone's problem. The second thing that we would draw from this is that there are differences between countries, and that this suggests, and this pushes us more towards, gives us evidence that context-sensitive approaches are really important to the integration of gender equality in English language teaching. Okay, moving on a little bit. Do teachers know how to include gender equality topics in their practice? Yes. And I think that's confirmed by an earlier poll this morning that everyone answered, or majority of people answered yes, yes, that they do. Interestingly, again, we do see significant differences across country. So for example, here you've got your more flags. It was easier to include flags than it was to write Brazil or China. But what you're seeing here is a higher tendency among teachers in Brazil to believe that they know how to include gender equality in their practice as an English language teacher compared to those in China, Bangladesh, and in Vietnam. Okay, and one more from the questionnaire. Are materials available to teach about gender equality in English language classes? The teachers that we surveyed said no. They said, no, there aren't materials available to teach about gender equality in English classes. Again, we noticed some differences across countries, and you can see there that, for example, in Brazil, Morocco and Botswana, teachers let us know that they believe that the materials available to support gender equality in their classrooms were difficult to find, or not non-existent in some cases. Okay. Moving on then to the interview data. The data that we have across the 6 stakeholder groups, and there are 120 interviews, but for this we will primarily focus on the teachers, but it's important to listen very carefully to the data that comes from all of those stakeholders. What do we find when we have analysed? Well, we do find that there are significant barriers for teachers to integrate gender equality topics and gender transformative practices in their everyday classrooms. That can arise from a lack of time available to prepare their gender-focused materials. Teachers and their pupils told us about the struggles that they face regarding gender stereotypes. We also have evidence that attempts to raise awareness of gender discrimination sometimes very much falls to the teacher to do themselves, rather than being helped with policy or curricula or directives from particular institutions. What we also find is a lack of representation of women in professional roles. When we listen to our participants, participants. That's what they tell us, and they give us examples of where this has fallen short. Our participants also talk about the challenges of bringing social matters into a language-focused classroom, and that's something that we would really like to change through what we've been doing in this project. Okay. What we would like to do now is to take you through some of the data from the interviews and to match that up with some of the beautiful lessons that have been planned by teachers around the world. So we're using some of the interviews to exemplify, to illustrate the kind of problem or the issue. And we're also going to hopefully talk you through some of the really good, fabulous lesson plans that we have available. Just an example here to start us off. Time to prepare gender-related materials is a theme that comes up in our data. This is from a school leader in Colombia, and she says, as a teacher, you invest a lot of your time beyond your working hours. You have an 8-hour schedule, and between class, you will suddenly have a space of 2 hours to plan, to grade, and also look for content, because you also spend Sunday getting the best materials out, because you don't want to give your students just anything. Okay. We see this issue of time to prepare materials coming up again. We have here a school leader from Brazil. I know the materials that English teachers here use are authorial. So if the staff are doing it and they care and they dedicate themselves to it, it certainly shows in the materials, doesn't it? Because the material doesn't come ready-made. So this is an issue for some of the teachers that we talk to. It is about time, and it's being able to do that quickly, conveniently into their language classrooms. Vander, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Anyone who has ever been in an English language classroom would sympathize with that, would relate to that, to the issue of having time to prepare classes, to design materials. And I think that ties in very nicely with the two presentations that we heard earlier on. The benefit of being the last ones, that means we can start to make these links. That means the first one was showing that there was not much on gender, or not much content that we would want to see about gender in international textbooks. And Elizabeth was also talking about the importance of locally designed materials. And this is exactly what we would like to show you. Some of the materials that have been prepared, that have been designed, that have been thought out by teachers in their specific contexts. So this first lesson that we're going to show you is a lesson that has been prepared by a participant in Ukraine. You see that this is targeted at students who are at elementary level or above, because this can be tailored, this can be changed, this can be adapted to suit different levels of students. It's an activity that I'm sure all of you have heard of. It draws on the Find Someone Who activity. Now, the different thing about this one is exactly the choice of prompts for the Find Someone Who, which you will see in this slide just now. So you will see that when some of the options in here have the potential to tap into gender stereotypes. So for instance, someone who has cleaned the house, someone who has ever visited a beauty salon, someone who has never played football, someone who has ever gotten into a fight. So in addition to finding someone who has or who hasn't done those things, the teacher has asked the students to write down more details about those experiences. And after this Find Someone Who activity, what they're asked to do is to have a debriefing session where they discuss where these gender matters issues come to the fore, and students start to be more sensitized to these stereotypes that mean it's not only women who should be cleaning the house, it's not only men who always get into a fight, it's not always women that visit beauty salons, so on and so forth. You will see here that the grammatical focus is the present perfect. So this is yet another indication that our work with gender doesn't need to be decoupled, doesn't need to be detached from whatever it is that we have to teach in the class. So we can integrate both. And it doesn't really take an awful lot of time for someone to think of some prompts and conduct a very simple find someone who activity in our class and bring this gender focus to the class. So Aisling will now move on and tell you more about gender discrimination.
Yes, one of the really, I suppose, really positive but also incredibly negative experiences that we've had going through our data and listening to our participants is the really good things that teachers do to try to counteract some of the really negative and bad things that happens in their classes. So, for example, this comes from a school teacher in Brazil. She says that sometimes legitimate questions arise from the boys that are less informed. You, speaking of herself as a teacher and us generally, we are there to provide information and bring more discussion, to hear them. She goes on then to talk about something that happened in her class. I remember that we took an excerpt from that video interview of the actress Scarlett Johansson. She was a superhero in the movie. The teacher then says, I forgot who the actor was, but both were in the interview. So both the male actor and the Scarlett Johansson. And then the question for the actor was about the character. How was the construction and so on? And hers, what was her question about? Her eating habits. How did she stay in shape to be a Black Widow? And then she reacts to this. Why is it that only he gets interesting questions and I get rabbit food? So what did the teacher do? Really, 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 really interesting. The teacher then. So anyway, what I did was I developed a lesson about that discussion. We took a graph showing that in Hollywood, for example, male actors earn more than female actors. We talked about this wage gap. And then the student, so this is the student who had raised legitimate questions about, is there gender discrimination? Is there a difference between the way that men and women are treated? This student said he took courage because the whole class was realizing that I think most students were saying that, in fact, there is a difference right there, that women are being harmed in some way. Right there was data right there. And then he said, referring to the boy, but what right do you lose because you're a woman? So it's through these classroom interactions, it's through developing classroom lessons that are focused on gender that we can begin to see, perhaps hope for some transformation. Vander's going to take us through some of those now.
Yeah, we have several lessons in this collection that we had for the project that looks at gender discrimination, awareness, raising students' awareness of gender discrimination, combating gender discrimination. So what I will show you here is one of these lessons where the focus is on the gender pay gap. And this lesson has been prepared by a participant in Colombia, as you see on your screen. You will also notice that all of the lessons start in the very same way. So they follow a kind of style sheet that provides us with synoptic information about what the lesson is about, who it is for, so on and so forth. So in the previous lesson, we saw it was aimed at elementary students or above. Here we have a lesson for advanced students who are a bit older, 16 plus. One thing I would like to draw your attention to is the preparation time. So again, we have another lesson in here that has been already prepared by one of these very committed teachers who are very willing to share it to the community, to all of us in ELT. And it only takes us 5 minutes to get that lesson and implement it if we find it is relevant to our context. Obviously, as we know our context, our teaching context inside out, it will be up to us to decide what adaptations, if any, need to be made before these lessons are implemented. You will see here that the main aims, the first aims of this lesson is about raising students' awareness of the gender pay gap, understanding differences around the world, so on and so forth. So what she did actually is, I suppose, something that you are probably familiarized with, the concept of stations. So she designed 3 different stations with detailed guidance. And as Ashley said earlier on, we're giving you a glimpse, we're giving you a very a summarized version of what the lessons are, but everything is there in the materials with loads of details for people to reuse, readapt that as they seem suitable. Now, what the students have to do is they have to go through 3 different stations. They have to work in 3 different stations. In the first one, they watch a video which is aimed at helping them to understand the meaning of the gender pay gap. So that's the first stage, that's the first station that they work in. Once they have finished that, they move to the second station, which is the creation of a mind map that allows students to consolidate their learning of new words and expressions. And in the materials, you will see some of the suggestions given by the teacher in this case, such as caregiving, breadwinner, but it's up to us, obviously, to adapt to that, to what is suitable for our students, depending on their proficiency level, depending on the lesson we're teaching, so on and so forth. The final station, so after they have understood the gender pay gap and they have worked on the mind maps, it gets students to do some small-scale research on the gender pay gap in a country of their choice. So they can choose any country out there in the world. But the station, and they have to prepare a presentation on the gender pay gap in that country. But this station is not only about feeling down, feeling lonely, commiserating about the gender pay gap in whatever country students have chosen. It is also about offering solutions, thinking about solutions, so developing students' problem-solving skills on the basis of a gender issue. So we will now move on to the other topic that Ashley has mentioned earlier on, which is about the representation of women in occupations. So back to you, Ashley, please.
Thanks very much. And again, you'll see this as an echo of the earlier presentations today. This extract comes from a school leader from Indonesia who is talking about how women are, or rather aren't, presented in textbooks and learning materials in relation to particular professions. So she says, in the learning material, for example, like for professions mostly, if you want to say police, it is policeman. It's not gender neutral. It must be the police officer. Most professions are portrayed as male, and then the nurse is the female profession. We have another quotation from a participant who says that this is from a teacher educator in Bangladesh, and she comments about the experiences that her student teachers have faced using materials in classrooms. She says some student teachers face problems. Many schools do not pay attention to gender equality. For example, one teacher said that the head teacher of the school used to say, "You women would do this kind of profession." The teacher could give examples, but the head teacher would not like that. Or maybe when the teacher was teaching in the class, the head teacher would come in and say to the girls, "You will ultimately do the housework. You won't be a pilot." So you can see some of the difficulties that teachers and pre-service teachers are facing in their everyday practices.
So in terms of the lessons, we've got also a few lessons that look at the relationship between gender and jobs. This one comes from Morocco, from participants, from a teacher in Morocco, and this is aimed at challenging job-related gender stereotypes. If you look at the aims, you will see that there is no disconnect between bringing gender into the classroom and work on English language teaching. So this lesson focuses on raising students' awareness of gender equality issues in the job market, but also developing their speaking skills. So the previous two lessons we showed you were for elementary and advanced learners. This one is for intermediate ones. So we're trying to bring you a diversity of lessons in terms of students' proficiency levels, to show that it's possible to do at all levels, from different contexts as well, different country contexts, so that we make it clear that, we can do things in our specific contexts. So what this lesson is all about, it starts by showing students two pictures, a picture of a female taxi driver and a male nursery worker, to try and break up with the kind of traditional stereotypical view that taxi drivers would be men and nursery workers would be women. So it starts on that note by de-automatizing students' expectations, perhaps. And it then goes on to introduce students to two different short texts. I'm showing you the one about Fatima Alame, a name that has been created by the participants. So you will see that she was a babysitter for many years until she got bored with it, and she did not want to do this anymore, and she decided to become a taxi driver. You will see the response people would give to her. People are surprised to see a woman driving a taxi, and they think it's hard for her, because she's a woman, to drive around the city every day. So students are introduced to two short texts, this one and another one, and they have to answer comprehension questions. They are asked to answer comprehension questions and also awareness questions. Towards the end of the lesson, what the teacher proposes is an activity where students have to match people to jobs. So students will have these slips of paper with descriptions of people, their name, their age, their knowledge and qualifications, experience and interests, and they will have a list of jobs to which they will have to match people to. And this matching activity is based on people's wishes, on their interests, on what they already know how to do, rather than on their gender. And you can probably see in here that, in the description of people, it kind of also breaks away with potential stereotypical views, in that Jeff is a hairdresser and Anna is a cashier at a supermarket. So the lesson obviously goes on. There are other activities. What we're trying to do here is to give you a glimpse of what each lesson is about, and how these lessons speak, relate, address the issues that we have noticed in our research data. And Aisling will tell you more about another issue, another challenge that we've noticed in the data.
Indeed, it isn't just around professions or occupations that we see gender stereotypes. We see this coming up in everyday practice. So, for example, we have here a pre-service teacher from Colombia. She's talking about her first teaching experience, and she's talking about engaging with children from 9 to 15 years old. And she says she noticed that the children will say things like, "I'm not going to play that because that's for boys," or "Don't paint my nails because that's for girls." For her as a teacher, while she's interacting with them inside and outside of the class, she tells them nothing is strictly for boys and nothing is for girls. She also told us about listening to classmates, where one of her classmates said, "I realised that my mom sends me to make lunch and not my brother. I never saw him helping to wash the dishes or something like that. My mom would tell me, like, go serve your brother or go wash that for your brother." We also see from our pupils. So a male pupil in Brazil talks about gender stereotype. He uses the phrase gender stereotype, and he explains really obviously and clearly, because of this gender stereotype, right? People expect boys to talk about certain things. So we can see there is so much work that we need to do in all educational contexts to be able to begin to break down some of these gender stereotypes.
So one lesson we've got from Brazil is exactly on that topic, on breaking gender stereotypes. You will see that, this lasts for 60 minutes, so potentially that could fit in most teaching contexts around the globe. If you wanted to implement that in your own teaching context, it is aimed at raising students' awareness of gender stereotypes while also developing their speaking skills and their ability to express opinions in English. So I'll just comment on two of the foci of this lesson. So one of the focus is on reactions to women discussing sports and social media. So the lesson draws on comments that have been made in response to women posting about sports. Things really sad, like stick to your makeup tutorials, or lads, relax, she's a girl, her football opinion doesn't count, or even more damning, stick it to the dishes. A woman who doesn't know anything about football, now that's a shocker. So the teacher gets students to read these comments that they might have come across in social media themselves or similar ones, and gets them to reflect on how undesirable, how incorrect, how inappropriate, and we could go on and on with the list of adjectives in here, and probably facing a challenge to find polite adjectives to describe. So perhaps we shall move on to the other area that is also focused in this lesson. So another area that is discussed is the inclusion of stereotypes in Disney movies. So the types of movies that several of us have grown up watching with, and it goes on to try and deconstruct the lots of gender-related stereotypes that we can see historically in Disney movies. So you have all the details in the lesson plan, but I'm aware of time, so perhaps we should now move on back to Ashley for the next and final issue we're going to be commenting on.
Some of the respondents in our surveys and also in the interviews talked about gender equality as a social matter, and therefore how did it fit, or where am I supposed to put that in a language classroom? And this is exemplified here with a school teacher from China who says, for junior high school, the overall teaching schedule is quite rushed. We don't have too much extra time to extend some discussions on extracurricular topics. So I myself haven't had discussions of such topics. Another example from a school teacher in the Philippines talks about where the focus in English language class is, it's mostly on literature and it's more on grammar. But luckily, we have some lessons that deal with that.
Yes, well, if you find yourself in that situation in which, you are very much constrained by the context where you have to focus on language-related matters, either because parents are forcing you to do that, or because you've got a top-down curriculum that you have to follow, and you have potentially no space to bring social matters into the classroom. I think this lesson illustrates how we can do that, even when we think we don't have space to do that in the curriculum. So what this lesson does is a lesson that is very much structural. It is about grammar. It is about teaching verbs. So as you see in the aims are develop students' knowledge and understanding of verb tenses and aspects, and enhancing students' analytical skills. There is no direct aim on gender, and you might be thinking, well, why are you talking about this lesson? I mean, isn't this supposed to be a session on how to bring gender into the classroom? Well, the point of this lesson is to show that we can do that even in indirect ways. So Aisling will show now the text that has been chosen for this lesson. It's a text from Human Rights Watch, and it is entitled Vietnam Adopts Global LGBT Health Standards. So students are asked to analyze the verbs and verb phrases in this text. And you will see in a moment the verbs underlined in the first paragraph. So they look at examples like confirmed, are, said, brings, so on and so forth. They're then asked to compare, for instance, the instance of confirmed in the first line, in the first paragraph, with the instance of have confirmed in the second line, in the second paragraph. And think about, well, why was the simple past used in that first example and the present perfect in the second one? It's the same lexical verb being used, confirm. So why is there that difference? So the lesson is entirely structural, it focuses only on an analysis of verbs. But what's going on in the background? The text that students are reading, or the text that students are being asked to read, is a gender relevant one. In the process of doing that analysis, students are being introduced to gender matters, even if implicitly, even if indirectly. So I think what we would like to finish this presentation on, this final lesson on, is showing that we actually can bring gender to our classes. So these lessons will be included in an electronic book that will be made available soon. The book is called Gendering English Language Classes Across the Globe, Practical Activities for Teachers. It contains 40 different lessons from teachers from around the world, not only the 10 project countries, but we've also got people from other countries. It is in the final stages of editing and will be soon out there soon. It will be out there very soon. What we do have, the British Council has just launched another book that is an outcome of our project, and this is for teacher education. It is available out there for free. You can download it whenever you wish. Why this is for teacher education? So basically, this book contains 30 different essays written by student teachers in the 10 project countries that we have conducted the gendering ELT. And there are loads of activities that people can use for self-study or for use in teacher education contexts. The essays themselves are very touching, are very moving. So just reading them is an enriching experience for all of us. We didn't have a chance to discuss that. That's for another presentation, but we thought we should share with you the news. So if you want to know more about the projects, if you want to find out more about the projects, if you want to learn about when the book with practical activities is out, please do follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. So you have our handle, our Twitter handle in here, and our Facebook address in here. We have been posting news about the project there, and we will continue to do so. We've also got our website, but you hear first and foremost from us in social media. I think what we would like to finish this presentation on is really an invitation for all of you to engage with us in weaving gender topics into ELT. I hope that we have shown you that, yes, there are barriers, yes, there are challenges. We have seen that in all three presentations, but there are ways in which we can go around these barriers. There are ways in which we can bring gender into the classroom. There are ways in which we can overcome our lack of time. We can circumvent pressures from outside, so on and so forth. So if you do happen to use the materials, we would love to hear from you. please do, if you have a chance, do write to us at the project email, gender-ing.elt@ed.ec.uk. We would absolutely love to hear from you, your feedback, how you're using the materials, how useful they have been, what you particularly liked, so on and so forth. As we've been stressing throughout this presentation, these materials have been created in response to a specific context. So we would love to hear more about the contexts in which you work.